Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the podcast where we take a critical look at the ideas shaping our world through the lens of scripture and historic Christian orthodoxy.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating deep dive on the hidden machinery of global conflict. So I want to start by presenting you, the listener, with a pretty jarring paradox.
Oh, please do.
Think for a second about a standard, everyday household washing machine. I mean, it's an appliance designed for domestic peace, right? It makes ordinary life cleaner and just easier to manage.
Right, something we all just take for granted.
Completely. But now imagine the tiny, inexpensive microchip that runs the spin cycle of that very washing machine. Imagine it being salvaged, repurposed, welded onto a circuit board, and placed into the guidance system of a cruise missile falling on a city in Eastern Europe.
Wow. And the crazy thing is, that is not science fiction. That is a documented, empirical reality of modern warfare right now.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to examine the geopolitical reality of these hidden supply chains in the current Ukraine-Russia war. We will be looking at extensive trade and security reports to lay out the facts.
And then we're going to analyze this whole phenomenon through a theological lens. Specifically, we'll look at the book of James, chapter 4, verses 1 through 4.
Right. We really want to understand the human heart's warring passions. Because if you stop and think about that washing machine chip, it's essentially a product of common grace.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a highly useful piece of technology created by human ingenuity.
So how does an object created for domestic peace become an instrument of destruction? Is the core issue here just, a failure of international logistics or a breakdown in customs enforcement?
Or are we looking at a symptom of something much older regarding human nature?
Precisely. While the nightly news focuses on treaties and trade bans, this discussion will equip you to see the spiritual machinery operating behind the global headlines.
Well, the physical reality of these supply chains acts as a perfect mirror for the spiritual reality of the human condition. But to grasp that, we first need to establish the physical facts of how modern war is actually supplied.
Okay, so looking at the geopolitical context from the reports, starting in February of 2022, the United States, the European Union, and their allied partners imposed an extensive sanctions regime.
Right. And the stated goal across those coalition governments was to deprive Russia of the military technologies, the financial channels, and the industrial inputs needed to sustain a long, conventional war.
Yeah, and we are just neutrally reporting the data from the source documents here. The central focus of these Western policies has really zeroed in on restricting what the trade community calls dual-use goods.
A dual-use good is an item that circulates freely and legally in civilian commerce, but can be adapted for military production.
So we're not talking about weapons.
No, not at all. They are not trigger assemblies or explosive payloads. They are just ordinary components. To track this, the Bureau of Industry and Security, known as the BIS, created a common high-priority list.
Right, and they identified 50 specific items that pose a heightened diversion risk. Tier 1 of this list focuses heavily on integrated circuits.
And then Tier 2 includes things like radio frequency transceiver modules and navigational apparatus. These specific items function as strategic bottlenecks in the production of modern weaponry.
Which makes sense. I mean, a missile doesn't fail only when the entire airframe is missing. A weapon system fails if one indispensable commercial component is unavailable.
Spot on. If a specific integrated circuit or a high-priority capacitor is delayed or degraded, the weapon is useless. These tiny, commercially ordinary pieces of technology are the literal choke points of modern warfare.
I am just struck by the sheer absurdity of it. You have a multi-million-dollar hypersonic weapon system, a marvel of destructive aerospace engineering, right? And its Achilles heel is the exact same component that tells a smart refrigerator when to dispense ice.
It's wild. But the empirical evidence coming straight from the battlefield makes this undeniable. Investigators are not sitting in offices guessing about these supply chains.
No, they are physically recovering Russian weapons in Ukraine, taking them apart on workbenches and cataloging the internal components.
Yeah, the KSE Institute released a report documenting close to 2,800 individual foreign parts found inside recovered Russian weapons. They looked at everything from ballistic missiles and drones to armored vehicles.
And the data points from that physical recovery are staggering. 95% of those parts were sourced from producers in coalition countries.
Right, and 72% were accounted for by U.S.-based companies alone. Only 4% came from China.
Now, there is some variation depending on the specific weapon platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Drones like the Shahed 136 rely overwhelmingly on foreign commercial technology. They are essentially flying kits of assembled Western civilian parts.
But then you look at some of the newer missiles, like the KH-69 cruise missile. Investigators found that out of 39 MOSFETs, which are a type of transistor, 30 were manufactured in Russia.
So there is some local adaptation happening, but looking at the overwhelming percentage of Western parts raises a massive logistical question.
It really does. If governments have a very specific list of 50 items that act as these critical choke points and they know who manufactures them, why can't they simply halt the flow at the source?
Oh, that's the multi-billion-dollar question.
I mean, the global civilian market must be massive, but is it really too big to police effectively when national security is on the line?
The massive scale of the civilian market is the precise friction point of this entire geopolitical dilemma. The strategic relevance of these goods arises entirely from their embeddedness in ordinary markets.
So governments cannot block them at the source because these components are completely ubiquitous.
Right. They are small, they are produced by the millions per batch, and they are absolutely essential for everyday civilian design and manufacturing.
And the BIS list also includes items like CNC machine tools, optical components, and industrial bearings.
Yeah, so a manufacturer in Texas or Germany producing a batch of radio frequency modules is selling them into lawful ordinary commerce. They have zero indication that those items will eventually be diverted to a military program.
Because you cannot shut down the global supply of civilian electronics without immediately crashing the global economy.
Spot on. The components do not travel in a straight line from a Western factory to a Russian military facility. And this requires us to analyze the architecture of evasion itself.
Right, the hidden supply chain, which operates in 4 distinct layers.
Yeah, let's break those down. The first layer is the front end. This involves the original manufacturers and the authorized distributors who are selling these goods for legitimate civilian applications.
Okay, and then the second layer is rerouting. This is where the supply chain becomes opaque. It involves third-country intermediaries.
Well, precisely. The UK government documented instances where a firm in a third country receives a purchase order from a Russian importer, buys the goods from a UK supplier without disclosing the true end user, and then re-exports them.
So the original manufacturer assumes they are making a lawful, routine sale to a distributor in an allied or neutral nation. They are completely unaware of the ultimate destination of those crates.
Yeah, they are entirely in the dark.
I can see how that structural reality creates an enormous blind spot. The manufacturer has clean hands on paper, which moves us right into the third layer, logistics and freight.
Right, the physical movement of the boxes. And this is where the documentary manipulation happens. The evasion networks exploit lawful trade infrastructure to hide their tracks.
They use commercial invoices, customs declarations, and warehousing agreements, but they actively manipulate the data on those forms.
Yeah, they use indirect shipping routes, multiple freight forwarders, and anonymous shell companies to scramble the trail.
So a pallet of electronics might leave a port listed as agricultural diagnostic equipment. Then it changes hands at a free trade port, gets relabeled, and moves across a land border under a completely different corporate entity.
Precisely. And then you have the fourth layer, which is the financial settlement. Because none of this physical movement happens without a way to pay the people moving it.
Right, the money trail. The Treasury and Security reports note a major action taken in January of 2025 targeting a sanctions evasion scheme.
Yeah, that scheme was established between actors in Russia and the People's Republic of China. It was designed to facilitate cross-border payments for sensitive goods while avoiding the traditional Western banking system.
The Treasury also targeted a financial institution based in the Kyrgyz Republic that was coordinating with Russian officials to implement another covert payment channel.
So you see, evasion works by fragmenting knowledge. No single actor sees the full illicit transaction.
The manufacturer only knows the immediate buyer. The freight forwarder only sees the routing instructions for their specific leg of the journey.
And the bank only sees the payment trail between two seemingly legitimate businesses. The illicit end use only emerges when you aggregate all of those disparate parts.
It operates like a massive global money laundering operation. But instead of cleaning dirty cash, they're laundering physical hardware.
That's a great analogy. The legal distance creates a buffer that dilutes moral culpability. Every participant handles their one small fraction of the transaction, collects their fee, and looks the other way.
Which makes me wonder, does the very structure of global trade actually incentivize this kind of willful ignorance?
Oh, absolutely. The structure of global trade creates the conditions where willful ignorance is highly profitable, Leakage survives in the seams between regulatory systems?
Right, you have goods control, banking compliance, and corporate registration, and none of those systems are perfectly integrated across international borders.
Yeah. A shell company can be registered in one jurisdiction, bank in a second, and move freight through a third.
But, this mechanical anatomy of hidden supply chains points us toward a much deeper diagnosis. The fragmented, evasive nature of global trade perfectly mirrors the deceitful human heart.
It really does. And this brings us to the theological anatomy of the situation. In the book of James, chapter 4, the apostle asks a really piercing question.
He says, "From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not, hence even of your lusts that war in your members."
Yeah, James outlines an unbroken chain of depravity in this text. He shows that desire leads to murder, covetousness leads to strife.
And a refusal to ask God leads to a perpetual state of lack.
Spot on. If we look at the historical context, James was writing to Jewish believers in the dispersion. During that first century period, there was rising zealotism in Judea.
Oh, right, groups like the Sicarii.
Yes, the Sicarii, which literally translates to dagger men. They used religious devotion as a weapon for political assassination.
Wow, so they would hide small daggers under their cloaks, mingle in festival crowds, and assassinate political opponents.
All under the guise of religious purity. I mean, they took the common grace of religious zeal and turned it into an instrument of murder.
That historical connection regarding the Sicarii is staggering when you lay it over a modern supply chain. The modern sanction bypasser who diverts a microchip for profit is operating from the exact same internal posture as that first century zealot.
Yeah. The technology has evolved, but the human heart has remained entirely static.
When we apply Reformed theology to this, particularly the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 9, we see a perfect illustration of total depravity.
Right. Chapter 9 covers the state of man's free will. The confession states that the unregenerate will is indisposed to all good and inclined to all evil.
The concept of a dual-use good is the perfect metaphor for the dual-use human heart. The human heart constantly attempts to serve both God and mammon.
We take the common graces of God, things like technological innovation, international commerce, and we inevitably find a way to use them to fuel our own selfish, warring passions.
Yeah, a silicone chip designed to wash clothes is a good thing. The ability to trade that chip across oceans is a good thing. But total depravity ensures that we will bend those good things toward destruction.
Absolutely.
I want to frame this directly for you, the listener. The macro-level global conflict we read about in the news is really just a large-scale projection of the micro-level covetousness that exists in our own lives.
Yeah, it's sitting right in the pews of our own churches. It is the exact same spiritual mechanism, just operating with larger budgets.
But thinking through the reality of total depravity brings up a very challenging thought. If total depravity guarantees that humans will always find a way to divert good things toward destructive ends, does that mean all these international laws are useless?
That is a crucial question to ask. If the heart is deceitful, what is the point of the legislation? It requires us to evaluate what human laws can actually achieve when they possess no capacity to regenerate the human heart.
Right, because looking at the security reports, they detail the effectiveness of Western export controls. And they make it very clear that total denial of these goods was never the realistic standard for success.
Yeah, according to estimates from the Government Accountability Office and the Commerce Department, export controls have significantly hindered and degraded Russian access to these technologies.
So there is clear, measurable evidence of friction in the system. Because of the sanctions and the required evasion tactics, Russia has been forced to pay 2 to 4 times the pre-war prices for key microelectronics.
They're relying on obsolete technology, and they faced a roughly $5 billion gap in critical imports in 2023 alone. Furthermore, the enforcement perimeter is constantly widening.
Like in August 2024, when the BIS added 123 entities across China, Turkey, Iran, and Cyprus to their restriction lists, so the law is actively doing something.
Right. If we draw a theological parallel, this is how the law-gospel distinction operates. In Reformed thought, export controls function very much like the first use of the moral law.
Oh, that's a great point. The law has the capacity to restrain outward behavior. It imposes friction, it makes sin incredibly costly.
Yeah, and it strips away the refuge of lies by exposing the exhaustive lengths to which people will go to acquire what they covet. But you are entirely correct that it cannot regenerate a covetous heart.
Human legislation acts as an instrument of attrition against human malice. It makes the execution of that malice difficult and expensive. but it cannot manufacture true, lasting peace.
I love how you phrase that.
I kind of look at export controls and the first use of the law like a massive speed bump placed on a busy highway.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, the speed bump slows down the vehicle of human malice. It forces the driver to hit the brakes, take a detour, and makes the ride incredibly uncomfortable on the vehicle's suspension.
Yeah, it might even prevent a fatal crash in that specific moment.
Right. But a speed bump does absolutely nothing to remove the driver's internal desire to speed. The desire to break the law remains entirely intact inside the cabin of the car.
That is spot on. Seeing how commerce and law interact in this way naturally forces us to examine the future trajectory of global trade. The military and economic reports discuss a fascinating commercial turn in modern war.
Yeah, wars are no longer fought just at the front lines with tanks and artillery. They are fought through the hidden circulation of ordinary civilian goods.
Private actors, people like local distributors, bank tellers, and warehouse operators, have suddenly become strategic actors on a global stage.
Their value to a war effort is based entirely on their position within a logistical network, completely regardless of their personal ideological alignment.
Right. A mid-level warehouse manager in a third country might have zero interest in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. He might not even follow the news. But his warehouse is a critical node in a military supply chain.
Which means national security now relies heavily on banking compliance officers, corporate data sharing, and supply chain visibility software. This blurring of lines between civilian life and military sustainment is intense.
It really is. And from a theological perspective, the Westminster Confession, chapter 5, addresses the doctrine of providence.
It asserts that God's sovereign decree governs all things.
Yes. And that includes the illicit trade of microelectronics through front companies. Nothing passes through these hidden networks outside of his sovereign, meticulous governance.
But the source documents also reference a specific eschatological framework regarding this commercial turn that we need to acknowledge.
Yeah, from a dispensational perspective, specifically pre-tribulational premillennialism, this globalized, tightly monitored system of trade is highly significant.
The desperate attempts by world governments to control, track, and restrict the buying and selling of everyday goods are viewed as laying the infrastructural groundwork for the coming tribulation economy.
Right. The economy described in Revelation chapter 13, the infrastructure required to effectively enforce these modern sanctions is massive.
You're talking about the surveillance of cross-border financial channels, the digital tracking of individual microchips, the integration of corporate registries.
Yeah, it's the exact type of architecture that could easily be utilized by a global anti-Christian system to mandate who can buy and sell.
With the boundaries between civilian commerce and the machinery of war blurring so thoroughly, how should a Christian view their own participation in the global economy? I mean, is neutrality even possible anymore?
Honestly, true, absolute neutrality in the physical world is an illusion. We are all participants in an economic system that is fundamentally compromised by human sin.
Which brings us to the ultimate redemptive solution. Because the geopolitical vacuum of peace, which human law utterly fails to secure, can only be filled by the person and work of Jesus Christ.
That is the only logical conclusion when you look at the sheer scale of the human failure we have been discussing today.
We really have to look at Christ's threefold office as prophet, priest, and king in this exact context. As prophet, Christ exposes our dual-use desires.
Yeah, he shines a blazing light into the hidden supply chains of our own souls, revealing the ways we try to serve God on Sunday while coveting the things of the world the rest of the week.
He acts as the ultimate auditor of our internal motives. And as priest, he offers a single-use sacrifice.
Unlike the goods of this world that are constantly diverted for destruction, his sacrifice is of infinite value, offered once for all to atone for our spiritual adultery and our complicity in a broken world.
And as king, he rules with a sovereignty that governs every single microchip, every freight forwarder, every hidden bank account, and every world leader.
We can contrast the world's hidden, corrupt, and destructive supply chains with the unbroken supply chain of grace that flows from the Father through the Son directly to us by the Holy Spirit.
That is a beautiful way to frame it. This brings in the third use of the law from the Westminster Confession, chapter 19, where the law now guides believers to grateful obedience.
Right, rather than just acting as a speed bump against our sin. The confession also speaks in chapter 21 about the means of grace.
Think about how this connects to the visible word of the Lord's Supper. The bread and wine signify a reconciliation that was purchased at an infinite, incalculable cost.
That table provides the grace that actually subdues our warring passions, doing what no sanction or trade policy could ever achieve.
The world tries to buy and sell peace through deceit, leverage, and massive compliance departments. But Christ offers the unsearchable riches of his grace without money and without price.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on that reality. Where are you sourcing your peace?
That reflection is vital for a Christian living in a complex age.
Mm.
We've analyzed the mechanics of evasion, the severe limitations of international law, and the total depravity that fuels these global conflicts.
The reality of dual-use goods forces us to recognize that the line between civilian and military, between peaceful and warring, is not drawn on a geographic map in Eastern Europe.
No, it is drawn right through the center of the human soul. The outward strife we observe on a massive global scale is the inevitable mechanical harvest of the internal lusts that James describes so clearly.
When we understand that the failure of supply chains is actually a failure of human nature, we stop placing our hope in the perfectibility of human systems.
Right, or the effectiveness of the next round of government sanctions. We look instead to the King, who alone possesses the authority to regenerate the human heart and establish a kingdom of true, lasting righteousness.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. The next time you look at a common household appliance, maybe your washing machine humming away in the laundry room, or a simple piece of civilian technology sitting on your kitchen counter, ask yourself something.
Yeah, ask yourself not just where its physical components might end up if diverted by a hidden supply chain.
Ask yourself what dual-use desires are operating undetected in your own soul right now. What seemingly harmless ambitions, what everyday resources, or what common graces are you weaponizing against your neighbor to satisfy your own warring passions?
It's a heavy question, but a necessary one.
It really is. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this conversation has given you a clearer view of both the world and the Word. Until next time.